Welcome back to the Complicated Kids podcast. I'm your host, Gabrielle Nicolay. I am a toddler whisperer, a speech therapist, and parent coach over at Speech Kids and Raising Orchid Kids. And today I'm joined by Jen Branchini. Jen, welcome.
Thank you for having me. I'm very excited.
I'm excited too, because you and I are both very passionate about the topic at hand, which is why waiting and seeing is a terrible, terrible idea. But before we get into the nuts and bolts about that, introduce yourself and tell the good people, who you are.
Sure. So I am a speech therapist and I own two companies. One is called District Speech and Language Therapy. It's downtown DC, and we work with little babies all the way up to adults in their 70s and beyond. I also have a second company called Speechfully, where I help other speech therapists start and grow their own practices.
Awesome. And so when we were sort of planning out this episode, I was like, what do you want to tell the people? And you were like, you said, why they should not listen to their pediatricians. So why should the people, and in this case, obviously we're talking about young children and young families, why should parents of young children not listen to their pediatricians? When should they not listen to their pediatricians?
So, my experience with pediatricians is varied. There are definitely a few that use a checklist I've given them and know when to refer, when it's appropriate to refer, and when it's not appropriate to refer. But most pediatricians are trained very broadly in a lot of different areas. They are not trained specifically in speech and language development. And so what I end up seeing a lot of is pediatricians tell my parents to wait and see. Oh, they'll grow out of it. Oh, they'll start talking soon. Don't worry about it. And then I do the evaluation. Some of these parents ignore the pediatricians, thankfully. And then I do my evaluation. And I find sometimes these kids are 7 months behind, 8 months behind, sometimes more. So it's, sometimes I'll evaluate like a 2-year-old who is not talking at all. And the pediatrician told the mom, they're just a late talker. They'll talk soon, which is sure, that does happen, of course. But also, that's kind of rare. And
it's problematic because, and you and I both know why it's problematic, but I'm going to spell it out for people, because the act of learning to speak starts when you are born, right? And so when we're talking about speech and language milestones, we have milestones for birth to 3, which is mostly like vegetative sounds and just kind of grunting and farting and whatever, fine, right? But as you get from even months 3 to 6, 6 to 9 is a big one, right? Where kids are making raspberries, where they're squealing, where they're, just doing all kinds of things with their vocal tracts. If we have kids who are not doing that, that's cause for looking down the road and thinking, you know what, my child's at risk for a speech or a language delay here. And so, we have parents who are going to the pediatrician at month 3, at month 6, I can't even remember anymore, 3, 6, 9, and 12. Those are actually prime touch points for a speech and language referral if we're not hearing like the things that are coming up on the speech and language milestones, which, as you so aptly pointed out, like pediatricians are completely unaware of.
And even though I have sent these milestones and have had them disseminated to, there's a practice in my head of like 12, 13 pediatricians. How many of them actually use it and refer back to it?
And it's hard. Listen, we're not here to throw pediatricians under the bus. They keep the tiny humans alive. That is a very important job, right?
I know they are very essential. I do love pediatricians. I just get very angry when I get a client who, had they been flagged and sent to me 7 months ago, it would be a different situation for the child. So I just get very angry about it.
No, and I do too. I get really frustrated. And for a couple of different reasons. One is because we are looking at the milestones that are like building since birth again. And so by the time a kid is 2, like they've missed a lot of stuff and we're going back to repair. But then, and I always say this to parents too, I'm sure you do as well, like besides just kind of the underlying issue, whatever that is, which, we'll figure out through the process of therapy and diagnosis, but then there's behavioral stuff on top of that. What are some of the things that you've seen when kids are 2 and 3 and they have no communication skills or verbal communication skills? Let's be clear.
A lot of them sometimes will act aggressively on their siblings if they have any.
Yeah.
Sometimes I'll see kids who tantrum, who get really frustrated, tantrum, fall out because their mom doesn't understand which snack they want. And maybe that mom doesn't even have it available, but she can't communicate that to her child because she doesn't even know what the snack is.
Yeah.
So those are 2 big ones I see a lot.
That frustration is really hard. And, I tell parents this too, like all toddlers are frustrated, but there's a degree of magnitude. There's an order of magnitude there that is really hard for everybody. And this is the other thing, like it's hard for you as the parent when your child doesn't have a way of reliably communicating, and it's hard for them too. And so everybody's just kind of frustrated, while also, and I think this gets back to like why parents are listening sometimes to their pediatricians who are saying to wait, which is you want somebody to tell you not to worry sometimes, right? Because like these questions don't come from nowhere. I think parents don't recognize their own intuition, their own knowledge, their own wisdom about their kids, or they're too scared of it. And so like you ask your pediatrician and they say, it's fine, then you get a pass, right?
Yes, but they're doing the family a disservice.
Yeah.
Hey, you don't have to worry today, but you will have to worry in 6 months or 3 or 2. The worry is just getting kicked down the road. It's going to be there in a couple months, and so do you want to address the worry now?
Yeah.
Or do you want to, well, and I don't understand why pediatricians can't say, well, why don't you go get a screening? Like that's so simple. Why don't you just go get an evaluation rather than saying, let's wait and see? I don't understand, Gabrielle. I don't understand why that's so hard.
I cannot help you understand that because I don't either. So I think for the people listening who are, number one, who are pediatricians, please like go find a speech language pathologist or a speech therapist to talk to about this, because like you should refer to them. The other thing is if you're a parent of a small child and you have speech and language wonderings, like if you're like, I wonder if this is normal, I wonder, is this okay? I wonder why my child can't, whatever, ask a developmental speech therapist. They know and they can tell you. And like I always say, like in air quotes, worst case scenario, the speech therapist says, no, there's nothing wrong, right? They might be the person who does say, let's wait a couple months and see, or let's tweak something and wait and see what happens, right?
100%. Like, in my opinion, it's know your lane, right? I know when I have to refer out and when I'm like, you need to go to the pediatrician, I don't know. Like, and I don't want to guide you one path when I'm completely off. Like, like reach out to your professionals, like refer to professionals. You know what I mean? Like that's your job.
Yeah.
That's my job.
Yeah, exactly. And our job, and you and I feel really strongly about this, is to look at early developing language and help kids develop it in whatever format that's going to be. Because the other piece of this is, so one sometimes gets late talking children who have either a physiological issue or a neurological issue that is preventing them from using verbal language, from using mouth words. We definitely want a professional to be looking at why that is. And there are a couple of key reasons why that might be. But like the sooner we can implement some kind of systematic communication, even if that's not with mouth words, and usually it is, but in the cases when it's not, it's extremely important to get that going.
Of course, for their learning, for their overall development. all of those pieces, the mouthpiece, the way that they communicate is completely interrelated to their fine motor, gross motor, adaptive skills. Like it's all combined. And when you're birth to 3, so it's just mind-boggling to me when it's kind of discounted how important it is and how related it is to all of the other areas of development when you're a baby.
You've touched on something so important that I feel really strongly about, and our practices are very aligned in that way, which is like when we're looking at a 15-month-old, a 24-month-old, even a 30-month-old or three-year-old, we're not just looking at speech and language.
No.
So tell me, what are the things that you're looking at? Not that you're treating, because we know our lane, but what are you sort of casting an eye for when you're doing an eval of a young child?
So I've had the fortunate experience of doing early intervention evaluations as part of Strong Start, which is the DC program. And so in doing those evaluations, I watch a physical therapist ask fine motor questions, gross motor questions, and adaptive. And then I get to see the reports. Where did they qualify? Why did they qualify? And so I'm very aware of all of the milestones, not only for speech, but now for fine motor, gross motor, and adaptive or feeding. And, you know, that has served me tremendously in private practice, because now I see a 2-year-old and I'm looking at all the same things and I'm looking for all the same things. And I refer out, oh, it looks like you need OT. You don't have these milestones. I'm going to send you to OT. Or looks like you need help with gross motor. I'm going to send you over to, a PT.
Mm-hmm.
So it's so crucial, but it is so crazy to see how much they're interrelated. Like if a baby, for example, is not sitting at a certain age and is not crawling at a certain age, that impacts core. Core impacts the child's ability to talk eventually, because it's impacting like your breath support. So if they don't have fine motor skills, your child may have trouble feeding because they can't pick up a spoon and bring it to your mouth. Pointing is a fine motor task, but it's a communication task too. Gestures, if they don't know how to use their hands, they're not going to be able to use gestures. So it is just so beyond interrelated. And I didn't know that until I started doing these like full scale evaluations.
Yeah. Play is another big one that comes in.
Huge,
right? Like, and to keep going in this like complicated, and part of the reason the podcast is called Complicated Kids is because you don't realize how complicated this is. But if I can't sit up, now I can't access the toys that I want to play with. Or if I have a weakness and I'm working really hard to sit up, now I'm trying to balance with one hand while the other hand does something. It limits it, and it has ongoing neurological effects, right? Because the way the brain does what the brain does, which is build synapses and connections and interconnections from brain areas, is through experience. By the way, side note, this is why I'm horrified when children in strollers have phones. Because, oh my God. Okay, but that's a different topic.
No, but we could go on for an hour about that. Don't get me started.
Right? Because even that, like, if we just take the visual sense, right? Because obviously we're not talking about a physical experience with the world if we are like a tactile experience of the world if the kid is in the stroller, but visually processing the world allows you to make meaning, allows you to learn, not only just like that things exist in the world, but vocabulary, different examples of things. I was talking to a family recently whose child is autistic, recently diagnosed, and they kind of were realizing that he has prototypes for things, meaning he has one example in his mind of what a dog should look like. And without more and more and more planned examples of, and this is a dog, and this is a dog, and this is a dog, and this is a dog. Now, again, this is something that neurotypical brains are doing all the time, but you have to have the experience of it. And if you are like removing yourself from the world, you're not having those experiences.
No, and that's huge. I love that you brought up the play piece because absolutely, if you can't sit up, if you can't balance and like navigate toys, manipulate toys with your hands, solve puzzles, build towers, those and then the language attached to the play, like it is so interrelated. And one piece absolutely needs the other piece.
There's a whole emotional component to this as well, which is if you are building said tower, and there's a vocabulary piece of this, but at some point tower is going to fall down. You have all of this resilience skills that need to be coming online as well, right? Because tower falls down, what are you going to do? You're going to lose your marbles and like never do it again. That's not exactly how it's supposed to work. For sure, there are kids who have a really low frustration tolerance and they need help. But if you have a fundamental motor issue, now you're really limited in your frustration tolerance because you know you can't. These kids are not stupid. That's like a whole other thing too, right? So then they're self-limiting. And now they're not getting the experience.
Yeah, and even like I think about some of my parents because they have a lot of light up toys. So I don't really like light up toys, but they do. And even sometimes if the batteries run out, like, and the child's like, hello, I can't get it to work. And, some of them flip out. God forbid their phone that they have ran out of battery and then they flip out. So there's resiliency, there's problem solving involved in navigating that and teaching them, like, you just go up to mommy and ask mommy for help. Like, those are words,
Right. But if you don't use mouth words and you don't know how to use mouth words, and there's a reason why that's happening, and you're waiting and seeing until something happens. Again, this frustration builds, and now you've got all kinds of hair pulling and biting and kicking and screaming that nobody has to deal with if you jump in there early. I want you to tell me a story of a favorite little itty bitty client. Like, where were they when you met them and what happened?
Oh my God, I have so many. I have one that, well, I always think of this one, and I don't know if it's a success story, but it's a story that really impacted me.
Mm.
I got this 18-month-old. He's so cute. He was not talking. And we had him in the session and we started doing actually a lot more movement. I got a big like exercise ball and he would press on it and he started making sounds kind of that way. And he was doing really well. And then he slowly started to lose skills. And I didn't really understand why, even though I know there are lots of reasons why. But I took it personally, actually. I was like, maybe I'm not doing something. Maybe let me just try this many things. Let me do this with mom. And mom she's so good. She was so good. She was basically, she could have been a speech therapist because she just picked every strategy. And it got to the point where she wanted to meet with my supervisor to get another perspective on the child. And what was happening eventually, which mom finally figured out because she took him to a developmental pediatrician, was that he had that period of regression that you see in autism. And that was very I think it was relieving in one sense for me because I was like, okay, it wasn't my fault. I wasn't a bad therapist. It wasn't my fault. And in another sense, I mean, it was very eye-opening for mom. It gave her a whole new path of like, oh, okay, so I got to talk to this therapist, this therapist, this therapist. This is where I kind of got to go with this child. I don't know. Every time I think of like, what was one case? I'm like, that case. Because there were so many strategies that you do when you're working with a little one that were so effective. And then there were neurological things that were completely out of my control that were also happening at the same time. So I think for any therapist and or mom or parent, giving yourself grace in situations like this, because there are so many things that are out of our control in terms of like what's happening in your kid's body in any given moment and in any given day.
You're
So
bringing
yeah.
up a really good point, which is we sometimes undercount or emphasize like real neurological or physiological aspects of communication. And it comes up a lot in constipation talks, which is like if a child has chronic constipation, they're not going to be speaking as well or behaving as well as they otherwise might if that child weren't constipated. But there's a lot of kind of these, and again, back to this whole idea that all of development is intertwined. If a child's not sleeping well or getting quality sleep, and there are many podcast episodes about breathing, tongue tie, sleep, all of that. But that is directly related to development of all kinds, including speech and language development. When we've got neurological issues happening where there are processes in the brain that we don't understand well, it frustrates me so much that we don't know more about why this happens and what to do about it. But, you know, we have the methods of treatment that we have, and so those are the ones we have to use. But yeah, it's all related, and we discount the internal physical experiences of children a lot of times. We think, oh, it's just behavioral. No. Behavior comes from the inside, from an inside experience.
Yeah, that reminds me of something I hear a lot from parents where I'm evaluating their child and they're not responding to their name, they're not responding to any directions, and they'll be like, well, he's lazy, or well, he just does what he wants. He's really independent. I'm like, um, sure, your 2-year-old could be very independent, and also they're not responding to their name 80% of the time. I mean,
well, and this is where it gets tied back to the pediatrician too, right? Which, because pediatricians sometimes reinforce that narrative, or maybe don't feel comfortable or like they know enough to refute that narrative, right? We're here to tell you, listener, no child is lazy.
no, that one really gets me mad because I'm like, of course they're not lazy. They don't have the skill. It has nothing to do with laziness.
No child is lazy, not even your 17-year-old.
Exactly. I feel that way too about the older kids. I'm like, no, man, either it's not about laziness. There's something that's maybe not motivating for them. How can we get them motivated to do a certain task? It's all about motivation.
Yeah. Motivation, skill, seeing yourself being able to do something. And that's throughout the lifespan. Like nobody wants to do something that they're terrible at, having had no practice being terrible at something.
Of course.
People who get really good at being terrible at things, and they're amazing because they're constantly inventing things. They're like, I've never done this before. That's okay. But
True.
when you're a kid and you're like knocking your head against a wall because somebody's expecting you to ask for juice and you can't do it for whatever reason, then you figure that out pretty quick, that you got to use other ways.
I see that a lot with my reading kids.
Mm-hmm.
They've tried it so many times and people have tried to help them. And those poor little guys, once they're third, fourth, they don't like reading anymore.
Yeah.
They don't want to do it. They don't like it. It's not fun for them. They don't get why they have to do it. And it's so necessary for life to be able to read functionally. And it's really sad that they end up feeling that way.
Sensory is like that too. In the earlier years, I always ask parents, how does your child feel about swings? Or how does your child feel about getting in the car to go somewhere? And the minute I hear they don't like the swings, or they don't like the slide, or they don't like the sandbox, that is a huge alarm bell for me, because if you're new to the planet and you're having new experiences, what we know about brains and bodies that are typically developing is they're ready for new experiences, because that's how you learn. You got to be able to process what's coming in, right? And if you're having a shutdown response, which is essentially what that is, when you put your kid in the swing and this is my daughter, by the way, when she was this age, like tenses, arches, cries, right? That's a signal. So one response to that is, oh, you don't like the swings. But the question is why?
Right.
Why don't you like the swings? Not that you should love everything that you do, but you shouldn't necessarily, babies who are experiencing things that are developmentally at their level and sort of curated with a safe person, we don't expect them to go into a fight, flight, or freeze state when we put them into a well-supported swing, for example.
No, and that makes sense too. Like when I ask when I meet a family and their child is independent, I'm like, why do you think they're independent?
Yeah.
What are the reasons behind that? That is what we need to delve into more. What are the reasons? It can't be that they're just an introvert because they're two. You can't tell me that your child already knows they're an introvert. There's no way. But like, yeah, asking why for any behavior. Why is it that you don't want to do a certain thing? And if there's like reason that you're comfortable with, that makes sense. Like, sure, you just don't like it. You don't like the taste or flavor or whatever. Let's say it's like a food item or something. That's fine. But when you don't like most food items and you only want to eat 5, like foods in general, you got to ask why. There's something going on.
Yeah. It's, I've said this before on this podcast, but like child development, when it's going well, it looks very robust. They make it look easy. And when caregivers see that it's not easy and they ask their pediatricians, like, is something going on? The answer really should be, I don't know, go see somebody about that. But really honoring parents' inner knowing about their kids. They're looking around.
That's what I think. I think families should be validated way more. I don't think they're being validated enough for some of their concerns. Sure, you get some parents who are worriers over worriers. I get it. But also like validate where someone's coming from because there could be some underlying thing that you're not seeing. You see that kid for 15 minutes every what, year? 6 months, you know?
Yeah, it's hard, but and it's also scary, right? Like when my daughter was little and I tried to put her on the grass one day. She was 9 months old. And the girl tried to levitate. She was like, oh, hell no, I am not sitting on the grass. And I didn't know why. She was very upset. I was very upset. I was like, I guess it's not the right time. I guess she doesn't like grass, right? But back to that, like, well, why? Why wouldn't she like grass? It's a warm day. She's a baby. She's never experienced this before. Why would this feel bad? Turns out she had a wonky sensory processing system that we got to deal with. And by the way, she's like the poster child for early intervention. So she got physical therapy at age 12 months. Thank you very much. Occupational therapy starting at 15 months. And by the time she was 3, she was done.
Yeah.
And was captain of the track team and just got into her preferred college. So thank you very much.
Congrats. That's so exciting.
Thank you. But all that to say, right, early intervention, the other piece of this too, really is about neurological development. Because we have the most plastic, yes, the brain is plastic throughout the lifespan, but we have the most plasticity from birth to 3.
Yeah.
And so, jumping in there with some positive patterns that jumpstart, a neurological trend that is helpful to a child, that's best done. Like if I can get them at 15 months, if I can get them at 12 months, I'm in. I want them.
I know. In an ideal world, when they go to the pediatrician, there's also PT, OT speech, and they get screeners from down the line,
Yeah. Yeah, without having it be a specialized developmental clinic.
Exactly.
Yeah. All right. Well, if we ran the world. Jen, if people want to find out more about you, how do they do that?
They can find my company's website is www.districtspeech.com. The Speechfully website is speechful.ly. We have an Instagram page as well. It's not super active. But you can also email me at Jennifer@districtspeech.
Perfect. Hey, thank you for being here today. This was fun.
This was so fun. I could talk to you for so long, Gabrielle.
All day long. Take care.